Welcome. So, so we should first generate the enlightened attitude, what we call bodhicitta. This is part of what we call the three excellences. So when we begin something, and particularly the study and practice of Dharma, we check our motivation. Why are we doing this? And our motivation really should extend beyond just something that we're doing for ourselves. And particularly with the study of the Dharma, then recognizing the relevance for suffering universally. This is not just an isolated little Buddhist endeavor, a little isolated spiritual pursuit, but it really comes from understanding where all the suffering in the universe comes from. And we shouldn't just accept the Buddha's teaching out of just respect, or our guru's teaching, or the Vajrayana teaching, or any teaching, the entire Buddhist teaching, out of just saying I'm a Buddhist. But really we should do this from our continual awareness of where suffering stems from and the wish to do something. So we would say we prepare any teaching with this first excellence, which is the motivation of bodhicitta. And then the main practice we would do without second guessing, without judging or evaluating what we're doing, just simply doing it. Ideally without any notion of subject, object, and action, but in the absence of that, simply just not being distracted as we engage in particularly then practice and study. And then finally, when we complete recognizing the value of what we're doing, we don't congratulate ourselves on what we're doing, but rather we remind ourselves that this is dedicated to others. And we think this is dedicated to others. So these three excellences is the framework in which then we undertake any Buddhist study and practice, but it's very helpful within our ordinary life if we engage with a similar attitude. Okay. Enough said. I'll get on to the program. So going to the calling the gurus from afar, crying to the gurus from afar. What is it again? Intensifying devotion in one's heart. We invoke the teachers, and then we're essentially aspiring to practice the path without sidetracks, without confusion. And this is where key to our journey is that we're aware of our own shortcomings. This is such an important point. So in this present section of the liturgy, going through the foundations, invoking really the foundations of the path, we're invoking the teacher's compassion as we're exposing our own shortcomings, our lack of understanding of really the realities that constitute our entire path, and particularly working with who we are, not just working with who we would like to think we are, like, hey, I've reinvented myself, I'm now practicing the Buddhist path, but rather just being honest with where we are and what it is that we have to work with. So Jamgon Kongtrul here, he writes, I'm hateful towards enemies and attached to friends. I'm stupefied in darkness as to what should be accepted and rejected. When practicing the Dharma, I fall under the influence of discursiveness, sloth, and sleep. When acting against the Dharma, I'm clever and my senses are alert. Guru, think of me, look upon me quickly with compassion. Grant your blessings so that I conquer my enemy, the kleshas. So we would want to be humbly aware that we're actually quite resourceful when it comes to just pursuing our ordinary habitual sense of how we do things. And that's where we very often feel justified in being angry, and we feel justified in being attached. Whereas the truth of the matter is we're not going to be very successful dealing with so-called enemies or adversaries, or you could say persons that we need to take a stand against, if we're full of hate. We're much more effective if we have compassion. And that might even be if we have to be rude, or we have to be assertive, or we have to do one thing or another that externally might look aggressive. If we inwardly are free of hate and we inwardly are free of anger, we are so much more skillful. So it's never a question of being a doormat. Absence of hate just means that we think clearer, we're more cool, we're more intelligent. And this also applies to attachment. With if we love someone, or if we're engaging with the world in a warm way, attachment again, and having these strings attached, these expectations and so on, are never going to be helpful. So if we could love in a way that sees the wider picture and appreciates the detail much better when it's without the optics of attachment, then also we're greater lovers, we're greater friends, we're greater friends to the larger community, and so forth. So that, and then also we miss the point in our journey about what we should do and what we should give up. So this is where, in the practice of the Dharma, as much as in the Mahamudra and Dzogchen teachings, we of course say, in the great vast expanse of equanimity, there's nothing to accept, nothing to reject. Within the relative truth, there's a lot of things that we should be clear that we need to do, and a lot of things that we should avoid doing. This almost goes without saying, but this is where there's an element of discipline involved, where we essentially embrace constructive action, and we dismiss and discontinue destructive action. So when practicing the Dharma, we very easily get caught up in thinking, we get caught up in being dull, we get caught up in just wanting to get away from it all and sleep. So this is again where these get in the way. Our life is short, and we need to be aware of the value of what we're doing. So once we have established the value of the Dharma, we need to, without second guessing or just overthinking it, simply just apply ourselves without getting dull. And this is where we also then, we can see, as much as we might be dull in our engagement with the Dharma, then and we might even pride ourselves of it. We might say, hey, we're very smart in the worldly sense. And that's great. And we might live in a culture where we celebrate the worldly wise. Then that's all very good. But if this stands in contrast to our sloth in the Dharma, then we should really see almost the comedy or the humor or the actually sadness in how dull we are with the Dharma, and how smart we are with ordinary, really futile and unimportant issues. Of course, this never means that we shouldn't be smart in the ordinary sense, but we're so much better if we engage with the Dharma and conduct our actions within the world alongside and in congruence, in harmony with the Dharma. So this is where we invoke the teacher's compassion, that we may get over what makes us unhappy everywhere, the kleshas. Like Shantideva says, outer enemies, they can only do that much, but the really big enemy is the one that we carry in our heart, and that's the kleshas, the toxic mind, the ignorance, the clinging to the self. So we might externally appear like a Dharma practitioner, and nobody would know better. We could, and of course in Tibet there was always this continual self-deprecation from the part of the lamas, really, where they would always talk about how the lamas look externally. so great, and internally they can be rotten. Like Chögyam Rinpoche, he would say, this status that I have as a Lama is really just like a turd that's been dressed up in brocade. so, so, so basic to us as practitioners, we should be very, very, if not keen, then open about how our appearances, they could be very deceptive. And we should really identify that the real enemy, again, the kleshas, they can lie completely hidden within ourselves. Sorry, I didn't read the whole thing actually. My outer appearance is that of an authentic Dharma practitioner, but inside my mind is not mixed with the Dharma. Like a poisonous snake, the kleshas are concealed within me. When I encounter bad circumstances, my hidden faults as a bad practitioner are revealed. Guru, think of me, look upon me quickly with compassion. Grant your blessing so that I can tame my own mind. So our shortcomings, they become manifest once we don't have the ideal circumstances. We could have we could stay in the countryside. We can have a retreat situation. Everything is very peaceful. But then when we encounter just annoying circumstances and we're sort of taken out of our comfort zone, that's actually where you could say our true colors, they manifest. I think we all are familiar with that, and this is where we invoke the teacher's blessing that we may tame our own mind. Again, invoking the teacher's blessing is not really constructing some cosmic parental figure that's going to save the day, but it's just the teacher actually embodies our natural sanity and intelligence. And so we invoke the teacher as an external reference point with the awareness that what the teacher really is just a reflection of what we truly are inside. So the teacher as the external manifestation of our inner awakened mind is what we invoke, and we see the perfection of the teacher and we recognize humbly our own confusion. And this is where we, for the time being, we rely so much on the teacher's presence within us finding a way forward. So we supplicate the teacher that we may tame our own mind. Doesn't mean that we come down heavily on us, but rather that we identify the beauty and intelligence and the qualities of enlightenment that lie below the surface of the poisonous snake and the toxic conditions of our kleshas. So this is what we mean with taming our own mind. So we're reaching the end of our study of Journey Without Goal. Like I said, we'll continue with Jamgon Kongtrul's devotional liturgy. But also, while we're doing that, I actually would like to go over a section which is about sacred outlook, and particularly the study of the Vajrayana shrine. Some of you would be familiar with that. It was originally something that was published, and there was a big art exhibition traveling around. It was called, I think, the Silk Route and the Diamond Way. And in there, Chögyam Trungpa contributed this incredible teaching on Vajrayana and essentially the Vajrayana culture around the shrine. And the teaching on this is just such an extraordinary overview of the Vajrayana approach and the Vajrayana spirit. And very much comes an extension of this chapter we're looking at now on Ati Yoga. And as always, Chögyam Trungpa's teachings almost on whatever it is. And that's why my point is always, don't be fooled or don't miss the point that even when Trungpa Rinpoche is talking about the most foundational aspects of the teaching, it all comes from the place of Ati. One of his students, you probably will know, wrote a book about Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings and called it Backward Ati. And you could say that right from the start, really, Trungpa Rinpoche teaches Ati Yoga, But at the same time, in doing that, again, coming back to this image of the mountain, then through from that aerial or that vantage point of wide perspective, appreciating how all the aspects of the path really constitute the path of Ati. So so whenever we're revisiting or engaging in any aspect of the Buddhist path in Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings, we're continually being presented really with the Ati perspective. And this actually also is something that we find in the lineage itself. Of course, the whole Dzogchen lineage, the Nyingma and the Kagyu approach very much operates with that continual invitation to the highest view, but very much doing so with an appreciation of the value of all the details of all the gradual path. So we are back to the big blue pancake, and here Trungpa Rinpoche says, if you're trying to catch what I'm saying, quite possibly you cannot capture the idea. Well, that I think we humbly established last time. It reminds me also when Tsongtse Rinpoche was teaching Buddha nature, which is of course again the same thing, that which is ungraspable. And he says, the only worry I have with presenting this teaching is that you might think that you have understood it. And at the same time, of course, we want, and Trungpa Rinpoche wants, and everybody wants us to engage in this path. But there are things that are difficult to explain. And in this incredible, ultimate, blunt situation of us simply faced with our reality, whether we want to engage with it through philosophy or we want to confront it through just this immersion that we're presenting here in the Ati teaching, is very much a question of us just continually not copping out and saying, I can't do this, but simply just we face our reality and we have countless teachings, and at the end of the day, it's a very intimate and personal journey, really, where we have to apply what we can. But the beautiful thing about the Ati teaching is that we are completely accepting reality as it is, and so all the different methods, they are in fact no different from the reality itself. We're talking about wisdom itself. And you could say traditionally, we would say until we reach Ati Yoga, we have methods that guide us towards wisdom. But once we reach the Ati level, the method is the wisdom itself. And that's why, again, like I mentioned last time, Sakyapantita's critique of Dzogchen, which Tsongtse Rinpoche says is in fact an implicit compliment, is that we could say that Sakyapantita says Dzogchen is not a path; it is realization itself. So of course, this is not something that we can elaborate on, or we could possibly afterwards get together and have a coffee and discuss what is the blue pancake. But at the end of the day, it's really just us, each and every one of us, making this proposition something that is the scope of our own practice. Trungpa Rinpoche continues, in fact, it is quite possible that you do not understand a word of it. You cannot imagine it, even the slightest, faintest way. But it is possible that there are situations that exist beyond your logic, beyond your system of thinking. That is not an impossibility. It is, in fact, highly possible. And that, of course, is a almost humorous understatement, because this is very highly possible. But it is something that is beyond the scope of words. Again, quoting Shantideva, where he says, the absolute is not the scope of the ordinary intellect. So Trungpa Rinpoche continues, the earlier yanas talk about the rug being pulled out from under our feet, which is quite understandable. If our landlords kick us out of our apartment, the rug is pulled from under our feet, obviously. That is quite workable. And we find that we can still relate with our world. But in Ati, we're talking about the sky collapsing onto us. Nobody thinks of that possibility. It is an entirely different approach. No one can imagine a landlord or landlady, or vice versa, who could pull that trick on us. In Maha-Ati, we're not talking about gaining ground or losing ground, or how we can settle down and find our way around. Instead, we're talking about how we can develop headroom. Headroom, or the space above us, is the important thing. We're interested in how space could provide us with a relationship to reality, to the world. In the Ati teaching, there's a lot of emphasis on space, and there's a lot of emphasis on the already existing marriage between what cognizes and the space around us. That is integrated continually within the Ati perspective, within the Ati practice. Anyway, in this section here, I think we should just leave it hanging there with Chögyam Trungpa's words. And essentially, this is all given very much from the perspective of Trungpa Rinpoche, wanting us to engage in the path, and very much from a point of view of knowing that we can do this. This, you have to remember also, this is a teaching which is given in a, this is a public teaching. This is a teaching that has been published and which is distributed. You can get Journey Without Goal in any bookshop. Trungpa Rinpoche is not going to spill the beans, so to speak, about the actual methods. Again, like he was saying, this is finger painting. And many of us here in this present context of the Nunduga, however you're connected with this particular series of teachings, or this study that we're undertaking together, many of you already are on the path and would receive the actual instructions on how to engage this. And this is then not, you could say, included in this particular instruction here. We don't have, these are not teachings on TGS or teachings on MK or SA or or Rigpa or so forth. These teachings are handed down in a very personal way. They're not really institutionalized as such, in the sense that this is something that we can just pick up a book and there it is. Oh yes, that's how you do it. Dzogchen, do it yourself, DIY. That's not really done. And we would say the dakinis, then the protectors of the teaching, they guard the teaching very preciously, and they wouldn't approve of that kind of an approach. So in the living lineage and the living tradition, the actual Ati teachings, they are given in a personal way. So this, of course, is what we as practitioners are aware of. Meanwhile, this is then you could say, a public book, and so we're going to be leaving the instructions as that. But again, Trungpa Rinpoche beautifully finger painting, alluding to the vastness and the inconceivability of what we're studying here, or what we're approaching. So Trungpa Rinpoche continues, I do not think we should go into too much detail about Maha-Ati. I have basically been finger painting, but that is as far as we can go at this point. However, we could discuss another topic, which is closely related to Atiyana, crazy wisdom. And this is, of course, a term that we sometimes have seen abused, and there's some obvious misinterpretations that take place. I remember not so long ago, there was discussions about the behavior of Buddhist teachers, abuse scandals and so forth. And in the media, you could read then quotes from supposedly students or people who are half informed, and they would say, "Oh yeah, this Lama, this teacher, was a crazy wisdom teacher." And this is absolutely not what is intended with what we mean with crazy wisdom. Crazy wisdom doesn't mean that we do deluded, action in any way. Crazy here, and Trungpa Rinpoche will first sort of eliminate all the misinterpretations, but essentially when we say crazy wisdom, we refer to something very precise and beautiful and profoundly compassionate, profoundly wise. And it just doesn't fall into the parameters of the conventional. It doesn't operate along the dictate of the conventional logic. And so it's a free quality. But to think that in any way that crazy wisdom could be some sort of synonymous with just frivolous action, which then would somehow be condoned since it was performed by, clergy, uh, is of course a very facile and convenient way for media then to represent what is perceived of as a context of corruption. So that's where, for us in the present context, it's wonderful actually that we can just revisit what we really mean with crazy wisdom. So Trungpa Rinpoche says, using the word crazy from the English language to describe tantric experience is very tricky because of the various ideas we have about craziness. Actually, there is a Tibetan word, yeshe cholwa, and it just means the wisdom which is not held by anything. It's the wisdom that is free. Anyway, this is just an insert a little bit about, just because there is then quite particular, and for years I was actually curious what the Tibetan is. So it's Yeshe Cholwa, in case you happen to be Tibetan. Anyway, going on about craziness, Trungpa Rinpoche says, in the American Indian tradition, there was a warrior named Crazy Horse. He was a crazy, old, wise eccentric who was a great warrior and had tremendous courage. Being crazy is also associated with the idea of being absurd, on the verge of lunacy. There is also a notion of craziness as being unconventional. And sometimes we talk about somebody being crazy about music or crazy about honey or sugar. We mean that somebody takes excessive pleasure in something or has an excessive fascination to the point where he might destroy himself by being so crazy about whatever it is. We might also say that somebody is crazy if he doesn't agree with us. For instance, if we're trying to form a business, we will approach somebody to be our business partner who agrees with our business proposals. We tell him the two of us can make lots of money, and if we approach this uncrazy person properly, he will accept our logic and he will love the idea of going into business with us. Whereas if we approach an intelligent, crazy person, he will see through us. He will see any holes in our plan or any neurosis that our business might create. So we don't want to approach such a person as a business partner. I won't talk to him, he's crazy. What we mean is, he will see through me. He won't buy my simplistic logic, my trip. That description of craziness comes somewhat close to the tantric idea of craziness. Still, such craziness has a sense of basic ground. There is a lot of room, a lot of trust, but there's also a lot of solidity. We might also view our grandparents' orthodoxy as crazy. They are so soaked in their own culture and their own norms that they don't understand our culture at all. Their crazy ways make them practically unapproachable to us. We cannot shake their faith and their convictions, and we feel frustrated when we have something to say to them and they don't respond as we want. So we might regard them as semi-crazy. So I think this probably makes sense to most of us. It sort of covers the existing definitions of crazy. Trungpa Rinpoche says, I don't think crazy wisdom fits any of the examples above. Instead, crazy wisdom is the basic norm or a basic logic of sanity. It is a transparent view that cuts through conventional norms or conventional emotionalism. It is the norm of relating properly with the world. It is knowing how much heat is needed to boil water or to make a cup of tea, or how much pressure you should apply to educate your students. That level of craziness is very wise. It's based on being absolutely wise, knowing exactly what to do. Such a wise person is very well versed in the ways of the world, and he has developed and understood basic logic. He knows how to build a campfire, how to pitch a tent, how to brush his teeth. He knows how to handle himself in relating with the world, from the level of knowing how to make a good fire in the fireplace up to knowing the fine points of philosophy. So there is absolute knowledgeability. And on top of that, craziness begins to descend as an ornament to the basic wisdom that is already there. In other words, crazy wisdom does not occur unless there is a basic understanding of things, a knowledge of how things function as they are. There has to be trust in the normal functioning of karmic cause and effect. Having been highly and completely trained, then there is an enormous room for crazy wisdom. According to that logic, wisdom does not exactly go crazy, but on top of the basic logic or basic norm, craziness as a higher sanity, higher power, or higher magic can exist. One attribute of crazy wisdom is fearlessness. Having already understood the logic of how things work, fearlessness is the further power and energy to do what needs to be done, to destroy what needs to be destroyed, to nurse what should be nursed, to encourage what should be encouraged, or whatever the appropriate action is. So, of course, as we've seen many times here, there's sections in this where I really should just leave this, just to leave the words of Trungpa Rinpoche just sitting there without further embellishment. I shan't say much about crazy wisdom, but I would like to say something about Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, whose picture we have on the left, which is Rinpoche was exactly what you have there described, somebody who was completely practical in the world, very well grounded within the world, and also very well grounded within an understanding of the most subtle aspect of human knowledge. And beyond that, Rinpoche was also someone who was completely free in the world, profoundly wise, and also with Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, as much as he was someone who was educated and trained in Tibet, accomplished within the Buddhist tradition of Tibetan Buddhism and so forth, things which we of course know, Rinpoche was somebody who was immensely, ultimately free and, you could say, embodying crazy wisdom as we have it here, in the sense that he possessed these qualities of being utterly as an ornament of all his, you say, very sophisticated accomplishments. He was a free human being and possessed this quality of just ease in the world that had, and being completely detached and free from any reference point, doctrinal or cultural of any kind. And that's where his warmth and his compassion and wisdom had nothing to do with culture, and you felt this around him. You never felt any kind of the notion that here you had a Tibetan Lama who possessed a very ancient, amazing culture, and where people did amazing things from this completely otherworldly realm of Tibet, the roof of the world, home of all sorts of miraculous things and mysteries. Not at all. There was this complete presence, warm presence within this world, and without any reference or any cultural barriers whatsoever. And that kind of freedom, if I'm reading this here, this is a little, I recognize the qualities Trungpa Rinpoche is describing here very much in my memories of Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. Trungpa Rinpoche continues, the fearlessness of crazy wisdom is also connected with bluntness. Bluntness here is the notion of openness. It is a sense of improvising, being resourceful, but not in the sense of constantly trying to improvise the nature of the world. There are two approaches to improvising. If we have a convenient accident and we capitalize on that, we improvise as we go along. That is the conventional sense of the word. For instance, we might become a famous comedian, not because of our perceptiveness, but purely because we make funny mistakes. We say the wrong things at the wrong time, and people find us hilarious. Therefore, we become a famous comedian. This is approaching things from the back door, or more accurately, it is like hanging out in the backyard. The other approach to improvising, or bluntness, is seeing things as they are. We might see humor in things. We might see strength or weakness. In any case, we see what is there quite bluntly. A crazy wisdom person has this sense of improvising. If such a person sees that something needs to be destroyed rather than preserved, he or she strikes on the spot. Or if something needs to be preserved, although it might be decaying or becoming old, he or she will nurse it very gently. So crazy wisdom is about absolute perceptiveness, with fearlessness and bluntness. Fundamentally, it is being wise, but not holding to particular doctrines or disciplines or formats. There aren't any books to follow. Rather, there is endless spontaneity taking place. There is room for being blunt, for being open. That openness is created by the environment itself. In fact, at the level of crazy wisdom, all activity is created by the environment. The crazy wisdom person is just an activator, just one of the conditions that have evolved in the environment. So I think a lot of us can recognize the example we have of the comedy, that we could be funny, we could be experiencing craziness from the point of view of just being lost a little bit. But then there's also the craziness that is very perceptive and very intelligent and joyful in engaging with the world. And this also, of course, is where there is this sense that nothing really needs to be done from the point of view of us engaging or initiating anything, and really just we are continually dancing with the environment. The actions are prompted by the environment, by the space. And that's where we could talk about crazy wisdom yogi as someone who is then freely dancing within the space. Trungpa just says, since we are reaching the end of our tantric journey together, so to speak, I would like to say something about how you could relate to all this information that you have received. You don't have to try to catch the universe in the same way that you would try to catch a grasshopper or a flea. You don't have to do something with what you have experienced particularly. Why don't you let it be as it is? In fact, that might be necessary. If you actually want to use something, you have to let it be. You cannot drink all the water on earth in order to quench your thirst eternally. You might drink a glass of water, but you have to leave the rest of the waters, rivers, and oceans so that if you're thirsty again, you can drink more. You have to leave some room somewhere. You don't have to gulp everything down. It's much nicer not to do that. In fact, it is polite. If you're terribly hungry and thirsty, you want to attack the universe as your prey all at once. I'll have it for my dinner or my breakfast. I don't care. You don't think about anybody else who might have just a humble request, who might just want to have a sip from your glass of milk or piece of meat from your plate. If you're told that you should be devotional, you might think that means you should be even more hungry and try to get every possible blessing into your system. Since you're hungry, you suck up everything, all the systems and resources that exist, including your own. You don't find yourself being a productive human being. Instead, you find yourself becoming a monster. So as we're approaching this, we could simply just, the implication is we could take what we can use. We don't right away need to become, buy all the gadgets. If we want to engage in the path, we don't need to have the full regalia of the shrine, all the tangas, all the bells and all the safus and meditation timers. We don't need to just charge into it. We just pick politely what is needed. And that also applies to us communicating to the world. We don't need to turn everybody else into Buddhists. We're not proposing that now we have found the truth of Buddhism, everybody needs to become a Buddhist. I remember when I started off as a Buddhist, my friends would say, well, what if we all just sat down and meditated? What would come out of that? That sort of thing. So we're not talking about rolling out some totalitarian regime of Buddhism. There's something that's very helpful we can use, and as we implement it gently, politely, not gulping it all down, not rolling it out in a sort of imperialistic way, then something good could transpire. So we're not talking about this sort of notion that we've found the answer and now it has to be applied everywhere all the time. Trungpa continues, there's a lot of problems with that, unless you have the umbrella notion of Mahati, which says it's okay. Everything is okay. Just take a pinch of salt, a spoonful of soy sauce. Just take one shot of whiskey. Don't rush. Everything is going to be okay. You can have plenty of room if you want. Just cool it. You don't have to do a complete job all at once. If you go too far, you're too hungry, you could become a cosmic monster. That message is very courageous, but very few people have the courage to say that. I am actually concerned and somewhat worried about how you're going to handle all this material. You could overextend yourself and get completely zonked or completely bewildered. Or you could use this as just another clever reference point, a new vocabulary, or logic to manipulate your friends and the world. What you do with this material is really up to you. I hope you will feel grateful for this introduction to the tantric world, and I hope you will realize from this that the world is not all that bad and confused. The world can be explored. It is workable wherever you go, whatever you do. But I would like to plant one basic seed in your mind. I feel that it is absolutely important to make the practice of meditation your source of strength, your source of basic intelligence. Please think about that. You could sit down and do nothing. Just sit and do nothing. Stop acting, stop speeding, sit and do nothing. You should take pride in the fact that you have learned a very valuable message. You actually can survive beautifully by doing nothing. This looks like this is it. Oh, there's something more. Well, that's beautiful. We'll look at this next time. Just on this final note here, two things really. The first thing is with this message that we could survive beautifully by doing nothing. This really highlights the beauty of what the Buddha taught. It highlights the non-aggressiveness of the Buddha's teaching. The celebration that our reality intrinsically is good. And while we might stumble in relating with our reality, if we leave reality as it is, and that means ourselves and the phenomenal world, we can discover its beauty. And from there, we can act compassionately. From there, we can act with crazy wisdom of interacting intelligently and attending to that which needs our attention, and also leaving alone that which doesn't need our attention. Our view, our seeing clearly the world for what it is. This is what is being suggested here, appreciating that. And also then the second thing is, like Trungpa just says, and I'm just going to echo that, we need to meditate. We are challenged in the modern world because we don't have a tradition of meditation. We're all so busy with our lives, with rather futile, not important things that we nevertheless spend so much time on, spend so much energy on, and yet what really matters is something that we just avoid and very often just simply don't do. We think meditation because we're not doing anything that we that it doesn't really need to be undertaken. The thing is, we actually need to be proactive in our engagement with beginning to come into touch with reality. And that's where we need to take this very seriously. When we say sit and do nothing, it's something that requires our intelligence and our respect for ourselves and our world. And that's with the practice of meditation, we're doing something that is ultimately beautiful and valuable. And as someone who has witnessed, since for most of my life, actually, a tradition of persons who did this and who successfully have done that, and of course also being, you could say, someone who hears and is heir to, you could say, all the stories of this incredible tradition, then for myself, this is continually the place that I feel is the source of inspiration. This practice of coming back to that incredible, empowering practice that lives really in this world of simply just sitting and being in touch, being connected through the practice of sitting and doing meditation. Okay, to see if there's some questions. Jakob, if you can find a moment and comment a little on Rinpoche's phrase, I exist because the world does not. The world exists because I do not. Thank you. That is very much the middle way. That we talk about these positings of realities relative to something else. We could say that what Trungpa is doing here in terms of language is short-circuiting the ordinary conventional ideas that we have. I exist because the world does not, is in fact our experience of being present exists on the basis of that there is nothing that actually that upholds it. So we exist unconditionally. Here we're not talking about the ordinary grasping mind, but we are talking about this theme that runs through the Prajnaparamita teachings and the Vajrayana teachings and so on, which our existence is free from ordinary conceptual constructs, what we sometimes call ontological extremes, that we try to pigeonhole our reality, and we can't do that. And our existence is, you could say, is beautiful because it's not premised on anything that actually is conditional. And we better get used to that, because this is the scope of the middle way teaching. Completely defies the ordinary, or the explanations, the glib explanations that we have in this world that we're continually awed with, so fail to see actually the reality of how things are, because all our little glib, articulate philosophies and sort of things that sound so intelligent, they sort of deceive us, because they're all operating within some assumptions around particular existence or non-existence. And all these concepts, they never really touch reality. So if you want to be, we could be endlessly deceived. And that's where, again, for us to appreciate what we're saying, what we're talking about here, we need the practice of meditation, that we're beginning to go beyond just the ordinary mind that grasps at reality. But that being said, the Prajnaparamita and Madhyamaka teachings, Nagarjuna and so forth, they do a pretty good job of using words to basically dismantle the way that language tends to solidify things. Could crazy wisdom also be called intuitive wisdom? Yes, but with the premise that intuitive then means genuine wisdom, that there's no delusion taking place. So you could say the yogi is intuitive, but you see there's intuitive and intuitive. And that's of course where, if we were to call it intuitive wisdom, the premise would be that it would be the lack of obscurations. And thank you very much. He really gives us permission to be enough and be okay with that. Yes, yes, yes. And now it stands up to us to give us permission to be enough and for us to be okay with who we are. And that is again where we come back to the practice of meditation. So please run with what Trungpa has taught, and we should do this with the practice of meditation. Thank you for introducing this beautiful book and letting me know that there is such a book exists in this world. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Oh, good. Let's see. Well, how do we follow up with questions after that? I just want to sit and do nothing for the benefit of all. You go, girl. Great. Have you been astounded by a soul who has appeared crazy but shown deep or beautiful wisdom? I think we're in a fortunate position that such persons do exist, yes. And it is very touching. That is very touching. Yes. What would be a way to accumulate merit when I sit and do nothing? That is really the highest merit. The Buddha in the sutra, he says to sit and do nothing for the duration that it takes for an ant to crawl over the bridge of your nose. That has more merit than making offerings to all the Buddhas for an entire aeon. So much merit in sitting and doing nothing. Remember the famous story of Bodhidharma who came to China, and Emperor Wu then says, I have sponsored so many temples and so many monastics. How much merit have I accumulated? And Bodhidharma just said, nothing. Zip. Nada. So he actually, surprisingly, Bodhidharma wasn't welcomed into the court, and he actually had to move on. And so he traveled, we say he traveled up to Shaolin monastery, and then he stayed there for a while, and then he actually went into retreat. But he is the first patriarch of the Chan tradition of Buddhism in China. And that particular approach was very much one of emphasizing meditation, sitting and doing nothing. Of course, in China, you have a big culture of accumulating merit in terms of making offerings and so forth, and doing a lot of things, which also is valuable. But like in the example of Bodhidharma and in the example of so many masters, we also accumulate a lot of merit by doing nothing. Now, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, which is a little bit different from the approach of Bodhidharma, is very much one of, we could say, beginning. Bodhidharma is very much beginning from the top, taking it from the top. The Tibetan approach is more the pragmatic approach of beginning, and you could say relating first to earth, starting where we are. And that's where we operate a lot with also the relative accumulation of merit. And this can be done in various ways. It can be done in terms of making offerings, but it can also be done in terms of going through elocution lessons, having a family, holding a good job, dressing nicely, and so forth. So essentially you could say the approach, the Shambhala approach of very much relating wholeheartedly with the world. So there's different ways of these accumulations, but all so valuable. But here, in this context, we are saying that this foundation of sitting and doing nothing has a lot of merit. Hi, Jakob. Do you know if Trungpa Rinpoche's teaching on Vajrayana from the Silk Road and the Diamond Path is available anywhere? Thank you. Yes, I do. It's published in his collected works, and it's also published in a work called The Heart. I think it's called The Heart of the Dharma. Anyway, we'll look at it next time. And so I'm going to basically be presenting it here. The Heart of the Buddhist teaching on something like that. I have to apologize, I can't remember it, but it's a very well-known work. So it's published and available in many places. Nothing more beautiful than that. Ah, yes. Would like to have more teaching related or similar to this. Okay. You're welcome. Okay. Did you meet Rinpoche? No. And I met a lot of his students, but I initially thought, this is when I was young and it's way back in the 70s, I said, I should go west and study with Trungpa Rinpoche, or I should go east and study with Dilgo Rinpoche. And then I had some friends that had been to Boulder, and they were kind of, this is 1970s, right? Trungpa Rinpoche's approach to his students was somewhat radical, and the fact that everybody was, very much doing what the counterculture was against, namely actually compassionately embracing the establishment and the forms of the establishment. My friends was a bit horrified, saying, gosh, they're all wearing three-piece suits and holding down jobs and whatnot. And so and also my friend says, oh, it's very difficult to see Trungpa Rinpoche. I remember that was the main thing, really. They said it would be difficult to see Trungpa Rinpoche. So then I thought, I'd already met Dilgo Rinpoche, so I thought, I'll go and see Dilgo Rinpoche. but I've actually always thought of Trungpa Rinpoche as my teacher, even though I didn't meet him. And I think on the basis of that karma, my deep devotion to Trungpa Rinpoche, I had the privilege to spend a lot of time with Trungpa Rinpoche's students. So he seems very close. Jakob, did you mention that Songtse Rinpoche had a teaching on Buddha nature earlier? Yes, I did. And you can actually download this. I think if you go to Khyentse Foundation, you can download Trungpa Rinpoche's teaching on Buddha nature. It's just called Buddha nature. So we have it as PDF, and if you're in Australia, we have actually still a lot of copies from the time when Rinpoche is teaching here. We still have a lot of copies in print. So, what a blessed era. Rejoice. Yes, this is the golden age. It is. It is. So, us thinking about the suffering world, let's dedicate the merit then to that we have the fortune here to have some a vision of a way forward and the opportunity to follow that. So let's dedicate the merit. So anyway, we'll continue for a while. There's actually, I didn't realize that, but there's actually a section here What is this? This is a Lord Marpa's praise to the Guru. So we'll look at that next time. Okay, looks wonderful. And again, this devotion is really also the way forward. So we shall, fortunately, we have that. We'll look at that next time. Through this virtue, may all beings throughout existence awaken together without a single being left behind. In the pure realm of the luminous essence, the ground of the great perfection, may they remain inseparable from the kayas and wisdoms. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy Gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together.